Hi y'all, welcome back to my channel. This is Skylar Baker-Jordan. For those of you who don't know me, I am a freelance writer and you can Google me and find my work. It's in a lot of places. Today though, we are going to be reading from Why Pro-Life? Caring for the Unborn and Their Mothers. This is a book by Randy Alcorn. Randy is, of course, pro-life. I am pro-choice, and we are going to have a dialogue. Randy through the text, me responding to the text, and you all in the comments below. So be sure to leave a comment, leave a like, and click that subscribe button right up there. I want you all to never miss a chapter of this book or any future books that I do, or indeed any other videos that I do. So, and I hope that you don't want to miss it. But maybe you do. Maybe you do. Maybe you're annoyed with me already. So, I don't know. In that case, bye. Let's just get started. Chapter 7, What Makes a Human Life Meaningful? Okay. Well, for me, it's you all. Yeah. Anyway, Dr. William Harrison, a pro-choice advocate, argues, quote, the real issue in the abortion debate today is not when life begins, but is it morally meaningful life? I think that is accurate. That is really become the question is, well, I don't know if I believe that or not. I don't know. I think a lot of, is it a meaningful life, is tied up into when life begins. I don't know. Now that I think about it, I don't know if I agree with that. But who determines which lives are meaningful and which aren't? Well, the state. I mean, the state tends to do that. The answer always is that powerful people decide whether weaker people's lives are meaningful. Okay, Randy and I tend to agree on that. Peter Singer, it shouldn't be that way, by the way. It should not be that way. But for most of human history, it has been that way. Peter Singer, the Princeton ethics professor, wrote, quote, the life of a fetus is of no greater value than the life of a non-human animal at a similar level of rationality, self-consciousness, awareness, capacity to feel, etc. Parents saying for their children to attend Singer's classes might want to consider that he also believes there's moral justification for killing the elderly. Blimey, is that true? I don't know. I don't know Peter Singer's position on euthanasia. Is it euthanasia, though, or is he saying that, like, everyone should be dead at, like, 80 and pushed off a cliff or something? Like, is he saying that we should legalize euthanasia, or is he saying kill grandma? There's a big difference. Those two arguments. So you might want to Google that and find out for yourself what he means. A Portland, Oregon abolitionist, Jim Newhall, said, quote, not everybody is meant to be born. Oh, no, I'm sorry. He's not an abolitionist. He's an abortionist. Portland, Oregon abortionist said, quote, not everybody is meant to be born. I believe for a baby, life begins when his mother wants him. So human life becomes real only when and if another person values it. I mean, this is the unanswerable question I've been talking about, throughout the course of these videos, is you can't know when life begins. Everyone is going to have a different metric. Every faith system is going to have a different metric. It's an unknowable philosophical, moral question. And so I think you have to leave that choice up to individuals. In the 1973 Roe v. Wade decision, the Supreme Court questioned whether the unborn had meaningful lives. But meaningful to whom? Doesn't every human being regard as meaningful the life he had in the womb, since if it had been terminated, he would not now be alive? I wouldn't know. I mean, if my mother had decided to have an abortion, and my mother was 17 when I was born, so it's not outside the realm of possibility that she would have decided that was the best option for her. Yeah, I think if she decided to kill me now at 36, I'd probably have something to say about it. But, but if she had decided to have an abortion when I was an embryo, I don't think I would have cared that much, to be completely honest. I just don't. Whites decided that blacks were less human. Yeah, men decided women had fewer rights. And indeed, you are one of those men who probably just celebrated the elimination of a woman's right to decide what happens with her own body. So, congratulations, Randy. You are one of those men who have decided women have fewer rights. Well done. Sorry, that was rude. I should not have flipped off our friend Randy here. Nazis decided Jews' lives weren't meaningful. I mean, again, can we stop comparing this to the Holocaust or to chattel slavery? Please. It's offensive and it's lazy. This whole. I don't know. Now big people have decided that little people aren't meaningful enough to have right. I mean, that's just not the truth. I mean, personhood isn't everything or something that to be bestowed on human beings by Ivy League professors intent on ridding society of undesirables. That's not what abortion rights is about. What even are you on about, Randy? This chapter already is worse than anything we've read because it's not factual in the least. I mean, this is all emotional manipulation, hyperbole, and I think projection. This is really in bad faith here, Randy. You were doing well and being, I think, in good faith up until this point. Personhood has an inherent value that comes from being a member of the human race. According to the Bible, this is part of being created in God's image. What science says of meaning. What constitutes meaningful life? It's a scientific fact that there are thought processes at work in unborn babies. The Associated Press reported a study showing babies start learning about their language to be before they are born. Studies show that while their mother's wombs, fetuses heard, perceived, listened, and learned something about the acoustic structure of American English. I don't know. I don't have the research to back that up, but I remember on an episode of Frasier, didn't they play classical music to a baby's womb, like a baby in the womb or something? I don't know. I think that there is some evidence that the babies can learn in the womb, but you might want to check that yourself. Newsweek states, quote, "Life in the womb represents the next frontier for studies of human development, and the early explorations of the frontier have yielded startling discoveries." I don't know about Newsweek 20 years ago. I didn't really read it. I was a Time magazine kind of kid. But I wrote for Newsweek for about a year. Just recently, actually. I published my last article with them earlier this year. They have a very right-wing bend, a very conservative bend, at least in their opinion section they do. And I just want you all to be aware of that. I'm not trying to slag off anyone who works at Newsweek or anything. I had a mostly pleasant professional experience there. But they are right-wing. They are. You just look at their opinion section and you can see. So, just a word of caution. The article says, with no hype at all, the fetus can rightly be called a marvel of cognition, consciousness, and sentience. It also says that scientists have already detected sentience, which is self-awareness, in the second trimester. The extraordinary capacities of preborn children have been well documented by scientific studies for years. By early in the second trimester, the baby moves his hands and shields his eyes from bright light coming through his mother's body. Quote, the fetus also responds to sounds and frequencies so high or low that they cannot be heard by the human adult ear, end quote. He hears loud music and covers his ears at loud noises from the outside world. At 17 weeks, the child experiences rapid eye movement, that's REM, sleep, or REM sleep, he's having a REM cycle, indicating that he's not only sleeping but dreaming. We can say that someone capable of dreaming is incapable of thinking, or can we say that rather? Undoubtedly, later abortions kill sentient, thinking human beings. By the end of the second trimester, the, quote, brain's neural circuits are as advanced as a newborn's, end quote. It seems unthinkable that anyone aware of the facts should defend the current legality of abortions in the second and third trimesters, yet pro-choice advocates adamantly defend such abortions. But are earlier abortions any better than later ones? Even in the case of early chemical abortions, which take life before there's a capacity for thought, death is just as real and significant. A living child who would have had a name, a family, and a life will now have none of those. So what? What of the woman who is already here who does have a name, a family, and a life? What then? What of her? Does she not matter? I mean, and that's really the shocking thing about Randy's book here, is that there has not been 1 ounce of consideration for what the woman might want, for what a woman may want with her own body or her own life. I mean, there's very little consideration paid in general to women in this book, but when it comes to the woman's body and the trauma of pregnancy and childbirth, there's no consideration whatsoever, and that's unforgivable, in my opinion. That your whole argument fails if you can't address the human being that's already here and alive, and that we all agree is alive. A flawed ethic is our next section. Singer says, if we compare a severely defective human infant with a non-human animal, a dog or a pig, for example, we will often find the non-human to have superior capacities, both actual and potential, for rationality, self-consciousness, communication, and anything else that can plausibly be considered morally significant. Singer suggests that individual human worth is based on its usefulness to others. Quote, when the death of a disabled infant will lead to the birth of another infant with better prospects of a happy life, the total amount of happiness will be greater if the disabled infant is killed. The loss of happy life for the first infant is outweighed by the gain of a happier life for the second. Therefore, if killing the hemophiliac infant has no adverse effect on others, it would, according to the total view, be right to kill him. Okay, so I don't know if Singer is actually, advancing this position or explaining this position. Because it sounds like he's just explaining a philosophical position, not necessarily agreeing with a philosophical position. I would not agree with this philosophical position, because I think there are too many other factors besides happiness that one has to consider, and this is overall happiness. And I don't necessarily think that just because someone is hemophiliac or someone is disabled, that they're going to have a less happy life than someone who is not hemophiliac or otherwise disabled. So, I mean, I don't know. It sounds like Singer's just describing a point, but maybe he really is saying that. Look it up. I don't know. When Singer came to teach at Princeton, he was protested by Not Dead Yet, a disabilities right group. They took offense at Singer's books, which says it should be legal to kill disabled infants, as well as children and adults with severe cognitive disabilities. Yeah, that's pretty shitty. That's a pretty shitty thing to advocate, if that is indeed what Singer is advocating. I don't know. I'm not familiar with Singer's work. I know the name, but I don't know enough about him or his positions to say one or the other. Maybe that's, a deficiency of mine, but I don't, so I won't pretend I do. Pro-choice logic started with abortion, but it hasn't stopped there. Once it accepted to kill unborn children, no one who's weak or vulnerable can be safe. Does the handicapped person have a meaningful life? How about the elderly? If those who cannot think don't deserve to live, what about those who think incorrectly? I mean, this is gross, because the pro-choice movement is all about having a choice to decide what happens to your own body. It's not a choice to decide what happens to someone else's body, and once that person, is certainly an adult, is a sentient being. But once that fetus that becomes an infant by the process of being birthed, then the logic changes and the rules change, right? And suddenly, and I've explained this before, a woman who has an infant does not have to care for that infant. She can give that infant up for adoption, but she can't have a fetal transplant. She can't say, okay, get this sucker out of me and put it in, this surrogate over here. That's not the way it works, So this is a false comparison. How much longer is... Okay, we got one more page, 2 more pages. Dr. Charles Hartshorn of the University of Texas echoes Singer's ethic. Quote, "Of course an infant is not fully human. I have little sympathy with the idea that infanticide is just another form of murder. Persons who are already functionally persons in the full sense have more important rights than even infants." I feel like this guy is pulling like the most disgusting, like extreme quotes from people. I don't even know who Dr. Charles Hartshorn is. Maybe I should. I have no idea. But like, I don't know anyone in the mainstream abortion rights movement who would advocate for the ability to kill infants. Because again, in the mainstream abortion rights movement, the primary question is about women's bodily autonomy. And again, this is where we're talking cross purposes, I think, is that pro-choicers really come at it from a bodily autonomy perspective, whereas anti-choicers really, whether genuinely or disingenuously, are coming at it from a baby's alive perspective. At the end of the day, those two conversations are being had and we're talking past each other, because we're having very different conversations about what's going on here, and we're framing them in very different ways. And I don't believe that there's any way for us to square that circle. I don't think that you can ever convince the anti-choicers to start caring about women's bodily autonomy. They're too far gone. As I've said, I think many of them do understand at a very sort of guttural level that, wherever you decide life begins, that there is a fundamental difference between a fetus and an infant, because a lot of them will allow wiggle room for abortion and incest. And the only way that's okay is if you tacitly accept that, okay, yeah, that was horrible, so that woman has to have the autonomy to do what she wants. If you really thought that was a child, you would not agree with that, because a murder is a murder no matter what. Not all of them, there are some, like I've said, who are dyed-in-the-wool true believers who would say no exceptions. Those people, I think, probably do oftentimes understand the embryo or the fetus to be a living person. I disagree with them, but I don't know how you convince them if they really do believe that. Personally, I don't think we should have to. I think this should just be left up to individuals, and if you want to believe that, you can believe that and just never have an abortion. To me, it's really that freaking simple, but apparently it's not to others. Okay, the last section is, quote, "Is anyone safe?" No. I think the last 20 years has showed us that no one is safe. We're all doomed. Is anyone safe? All right, here we go. David Boonin argues that abortion is morally criticizable, yet morally permissible. It's permissible, he says, because abortion may potentially produce, quote, "overall happiness." These philosophical arguments bore me. I'm interested in material arguments. I don't really care about any of this. Like Singer, Boonin overlooks the fact that the same subjective sense of happiness, as measured by convenience and relief of stress or financial hardship, can be achieved by taking the lives of other people, not just the unborn. Once something is regarded as morally permissible because it may appear to produce happiness, there's nothing that can't qualify. That's not true. I mean, that's just not necessarily true. I mean, alcohol causes happiness, but we still have outlawed marijuana and cocaine and drunk driving and all sorts of... I mean, you can still regulate behavior while allowing it to be legal. In the case of alcohol, you can drink, but you can't be publicly intoxicated. You can't drive under the influence. You can't do it until you're 21. I mean, but trust me, I'm a recovering alcoholic, and while alcohol in a lot of ways ruined my life, alcohol also made me really freaking happy a lot of times. So, oh gosh. Hidden beneath much of the discussion of what constitutes meaningful life is utilitarianism. No, that's probably true. Are mentally and physically disabled or disadvantaged people useful to the healthy and powerful, or are they burden to us? As one feminist group points out, if unborn children are not safe, no one is safe. Okay, this is probably not a feminist group. This is probably one of those, like, anti-choice groups that masquerades itself as feminist. But, like, what's her name? Patricia Heaton. Patricia Heaton's one of those right-wing women who claims to be a feminist, but kind of opposes women's rights. Fantastic actress. I'm a big fan of her as an actress, but her politics leave something to be desired. If we take any living member of the species, Homo sapiens, and put them outside the realm of legal protection, we undercut the case against discrimination for everyone else, this supposedly feminist group says. The basis for equal treatment under the law is that being a member of the species is sufficient to be a member of the human community without consideration for race, gender, disability, age, stage of development, state of dependency, place of residence, or amount of property ownership. I mean, that's just never how it's worked in reality. I mean, and it's interesting. Such a capitalist statement, place of residence, okay, that is one thing, but amount of property ownership, like, to even consider that as something that would need to be said. Like, but in America, it is something that needs to be said, because we property owners do tend to have more rights. Abortion has set us on a dangerous course. We may come to our senses and back away from the slippery slope, or we may follow it to an inescapable conclusion, a society in which the powerful, for their own self-interest, determine which human beings will live and which will die. University of Chicago biologist Dr. Leon Kass says, concerning the direction of modern science and medicine, we are already witnessing the erosion of our idea of man as something splendid or divine, as a creature with freedom and dignity. And clearly, if we come to see ourselves as meat, then meat we shall become. This is what the world being shaped by the rhetoric of the abortion rights movement. Is this the world you want your children and your grandchildren to live in? Yes, it absolutely is. I want a world where my daughter, my granddaughter, my great-granddaughter, and so on down the line can have final and sole decision in what happens to their bodies. That is the world I want. All right, on that note, that ends whatever chapter that was. I believe it was chapter 7. And that also ends section 2. So section 3 is called The Woman. So we will be talking about women in the coming chapters. Until then, y'all take care. Bye-bye.